My name is Isabella, and I am 29 years old. At my own engagement party, I walked into the private dining room I paid for and discovered the seating chart had been altered. The main table, designed for 10, had been swapped for a round table of 6. My fiancé's family occupied every single chair. My parents and my younger brother stood awkwardly near the server's station. When I approached the table, I heard my future father-in-law swirl his champagne and say, "They look poor and low class. Let them stand. It is where they belong." My fiancé chuckled and nodded in agreement. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I delivered an announcement that dismantled his family's fake empire in front of everyone they tried to impress. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Maya Tells Stories, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Now let me take you back to a Friday evening at a boutique hotel in downtown Tampa, Florida. The night I realized the man I loved viewed my family as the hired help. The private dining room cost $4,218.75 for the evening. I know the exact number because the charge cleared my checking account 2 days prior. I work as a supply chain director for a regional hospital network. My brain is wired for logistics, contracts, and vendor accountability. When I walked into that room, my internal dashboard flagged a critical error. We had agreed on a long farmhouse table to seat both immediate families together. Instead, a round table sat in the center of the room, holding exactly 6 place settings. Seated at that table were Julian, who is 31, his parents, Richard and Brenda, his sister Chloe, and his 2 grandparents. They were already eating the appetizers. Standing 10 feet away, leaning against a dark mahogany wall near the kitchen doors, were my father Tom, my mother Sarah, and my brother Lucas. My parents built a commercial HVAC company in Orlando from the ground up. They have 0 debt. They hold 7 figures in index funds. They also drive 5-year-old Fords and buy their clothes off the rack. My father has calluses on his hands from 30 years of working with sheet metal and Freon. Julian's family projects a very different reality. They lease European luxury cars, wear visible designer labels, and talk endlessly about their country club in Miami. I walked across the room. The heels of my shoes sank slightly into the thick carpet, muffling my steps. Richard leaned back in his chair, holding a glass of the reserve champagne I had selected. It was $140 a bottle. He looked over Julian's shoulder at my father, then turned to the table. "They look poor and low class," Richard said, his voice carrying over the low jazz playing through the ceiling speakers. "Let them stand. It is where they belong." I waited for Julian to defend them. I waited for the man who proposed to me 6 months ago to set his glass down, stand up, and pull a chair over for my mother. Julian did not stand. He chuckled, took a sip of his drink, and said, "Yeah, they do look a little out of place here." The physical sensation of betrayal is rarely hot. For me, it was cold, a sudden, sharp drop in temperature. I stood 2 feet behind Julian. I watched Brenda wave down a waiter, holding up an empty bread plate. I looked at my father, a man who works 60-hour weeks, shifting his weight from one foot to the other in a room his daughter rented. I did not cause a scene. In supply chain management, when a vendor breaches a contract this severely, you do not yell at them. You cut their funding. I turned away from the table and walked toward my parents, realizing that the arrogance sitting at the center of the room was masking a structural failure I needed to audit. I walked past the round table. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead. I did not look at Julian. I did not look at his father. I walked directly to where my family stood near the swinging kitchen doors. My father, Tom, had his hands clasped in front of him. He wore a navy suit he purchased off the rack 3 years ago. It fits him perfectly, but it lacks the bespoke tailoring and imported fabric of Richard's jacket. My mother, Sarah, stood beside him, her posture straight, holding a simple black clutch. My younger brother, Lucas, shifted his weight from his left foot to his right. His jaw was tight. Lucas recognized the disrespect immediately, but he remained quiet, waiting for my lead. I touched my father on the arm. I kept my voice low and steady. I asked them to step out onto the private patio overlooking the city skyline. I guided them away from the server station and through the heavy glass doors. As we moved away from the dining room, the contrast between the two families crystallized in my mind with clinical clarity. My parents own a commercial heating and air conditioning company in Orlando. They started the business 25 years ago with a single used van, a box of tools, and a second mortgage on their starter home. Today, they employ 40 people. They service 22 corporate office parks across Central Florida. They are entirely debt-free. They max out their retirement accounts every single year. They drive vehicles they own outright, specifically 5-year-old Ford trucks and sedans that run perfectly. They never talk about money. They simply possess it. Julian's family treats wealth like a competitive sport. They reside in Miami. They lease 2 European luxury sedans, trading them in every 36 months to ensure the license plates always look current. Brenda wears clothing plastered with heavy designer logos, treating her daily outfits like walking billboards. Richard rarely finishes a conversation without mentioning their exclusive country club membership, the greens fees, or the affluent members he claims to golf with. They project the image of generational wealth. However, looking back through the lens of this evening, I realized their wealth was always spoken, never demonstrated. The data points had been accumulating for months. I simply chose to categorize them as minor anomalies rather than a behavioral pattern. 3 months ago, at a dinner celebrating our initial engagement, the waiter brought the check. The bill was $340. Julian patted his jacket pockets, put on a confused expression, and claimed he left his wallet in the center console of my car. I paid the bill. 4 weeks after that incident, Richard met my father for the very first time at a casual lunch. Tom reached out to shake hands. Richard looked down at the thick calluses on my father's palms, smiled a thin, tight smile, and asked if Tom ever thought about hiring people to do the dirty labor so he could finally relax. Tom just laughed it off, assuming it was a clumsy attempt at small talk. But the condescension was surgical and deliberate. Then came the venue selection. I wanted a simple, elegant dinner at a local restaurant we frequented near my apartment. Brenda vetoed the idea immediately. She insisted that a Tampa boutique hotel was the only acceptable standard for her friends and extended family who might drop by to offer congratulations. The deposit alone was steep. I had to transfer $1,500 from my high-yield savings account to cover the final balance of the room. Julian promised he would split the cost with me when his quarterly performance bonus cleared at work. That bonus never materialized in our shared account. The heavy glass door slid open behind us. The humid Florida evening air wrapped around us on the patio. Julian stepped outside. He did not look apologetic or embarrassed. He looked irritated. He adjusted his silk tie, let out a sharp sigh, and crossed his arms over his chest. "Isabella, what are you doing out here?" Julian asked. His tone was not concerned. It was managerial, the voice of someone dealing with an insubordinate employee. "You are making a scene. Come back inside and sit down." I looked at him. I maintained a neutral expression. I asked him where exactly he expected my parents and my brother to sit, considering his family currently occupied all 6 available chairs at the only table in the room. Julian rolled his eyes. It was a calculated gesture, designed to make my logical question seem ridiculous and emotional. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to that calm, reasonable pitch people often adopt when they are preparing to lie. "The hotel staff messed up the seating chart," Julian said smoothly. "They brought in a round table instead of the long farmhouse table we requested. My parents have bad backs, Isabella. You know that. They needed to sit down immediately when they arrived. They could not wait standing up while the staff tried to fix the mistake. You are overreacting to a simple catering error. Just come inside and we will have the waiters bring some folding chairs." I stared at his face. I studied the slight twitch in his jaw and the way he avoided making direct eye contact with my father. Julian was confident in his lie because he assumed I had just arrived at the venue. He operated under the assumption that I walked in precisely when my parents did. He did not know I had been standing in the hidden hallway near the kitchen 20 minutes earlier. I was finalizing the staff gratuity with the event coordinator. From that specific hallway, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the private dining room. I saw the original farmhouse table we contracted. It was perfectly set for 10 people, complete with the centerpieces I ordered. I watched Brenda walk up to the maitre d'. I watched her pull a crisp $50 bill from her designer purse and press it directly into his palm. I watched her point to the long table, shake her head, and then point to the chairs. Within 5 minutes, the hotel staff removed the long table entirely. They rolled in a smaller round one and set exactly 6 chairs around it. The venue did not make a mistake. The hotel staff executed a paid request. Brenda purchased my family's exclusion for $50. She intentionally orchestrated a scenario where my parents would be forced to stand like servants while her family consumed the food and drink I financed. And now, the man I planned to marry was standing on a patio, looking me in the eye, and attempting to gaslight me into believing my own family was the problem. I did not correct his lie. I did not tell him what I saw. Arguing with a liar only gives them an opportunity to refine their next fabrication. I simply filed the data point away. The missing chairs were not a social faux pas. They were a dominance test. Julian and his family were testing the boundaries of what I would tolerate. They needed to know if I would force my own father to stand in the corner just to keep the peace with them. I realized in that exact moment that the wedding was never going to happen. The only remaining objective was to determine the true depth of their deception. I turned my attention back to my parents, leaving Julian waiting for an apology he would never receive. Julian stood on the patio. The neon lights from the Tampa skyline reflected off the thick glass door behind him. He let out a loud, theatrical sigh, the kind designed to make everyone else feel unreasonable. He looked directly at my father. "Tom, you need to stop being so sensitive," Julian said. "It is just dinner. Come back inside, sit down, and let us enjoy the evening." Julian deployed the word sensitive like a weapon. It is a tactical choice of vocabulary. Manipulators frequently use it to transfer the responsibility of their offense onto your reaction. If you get upset that they disrespected you, you are the problem for having emotions, not them for causing the damage. My father did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists. Tom manages crews of tough, hardened field technicians. He negotiates multi-million-dollar commercial heating and cooling contracts with ruthless property developers. He knows the precise difference between a casual misunderstanding and a calculated insult. He placed a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. His grip was steady and grounding. "We do not stay where we are not respected," my father said. He did not look at Julian when he delivered the sentence. He looked only at me. It was not a command dictating what I should do. It was a firm statement of our core family values. Sarah, my mother, nodded once in silent agreement. She adjusted the strap of her clutch. Lucas, my younger brother, finally uncrossed his arms. He took a half step toward Julian, closing the physical distance just enough to make his height advantage obvious. My father intercepted Lucas with a brief, sharp shake of his head. Starting a shouting match or a physical altercation would only give Julian's family the narrative of victimhood they desperately wanted. My parents turned and walked toward the valet stand. I watched them go. Their exit was dignified, quiet, and permanent. I did not follow them immediately. I had a logistical transaction to finalize before I could leave the premises. I walked back inside, bypassing the private dining room entirely, and headed straight for the event coordinator's office down the hall. The coordinator, a young woman named Chloe, looked up from her dual monitors. She saw the expression on my face and immediately stopped typing. I asked her to close out the tab for the engagement party. I requested the itemized folio to be printed right then and there. Chloe handed me the long sheet of receipt paper. I read every single line item. 4 bottles of the reserve champagne, 6 prime rib entrees, 4 imported lobster appetizers, the valet validation for Richard's leased European sedan, the room rental fee, the state taxes, the mandatory 20% gratuity. The exact final number was $4,218.75. I pulled my corporate rewards credit card from my wallet. I handed it to Chloe. I watched the card machine process the chip. I signed my name on the glowing digital screen. People might wonder why I would pay thousands of dollars for a dinner my own family was banned from eating. The logic is simple. Leaving an unpaid tab gives a parasite leverage. It provides them with an excuse to call you, a reason to claim you wronged them, a metric to paint you as irresponsible. Paying the bill severed the immediate financial tether. It closed the account cleanly. I needed a sterile baseline for the actions I was about to take. I took the printed receipt, folded it precisely in half, and placed it inside my purse. I walked back down the corridor to the private dining room. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. The scene inside was a portrait of unearned consumption. Richard was cutting into a thick piece of prime rib, his knife scraping loudly against the expensive hotel china. Julian was pouring himself another glass of the champagne I had just financed. Brenda had a piece of lobster poised on her fork. They did not look guilty. They looked victorious. They had successfully evicted the actual hosts and seized the resources for themselves. Brenda looked up toward the doorway. She noticed my parents were missing. She chewed her food, swallowed deliberately, and dabbed the corners of her mouth with a white linen napkin. "Did your folks leave already?" Brenda asked. Her tone dripped with feigned innocence. How rude. We were just about to order another bottle of wine to celebrate the two families coming together. Julian stood up, still holding his crystal flute. "Isabella, where is Tom?" he demanded. "Tell me your father did not actually walk out over a simple chair shortage." I stood at the head of the round table. The empty physical space where my family should have been standing felt dense and heavy. I looked directly into Julian's eyes. I did not raise the pitch of my voice. I did not offer an explanation or an apology. "I am going home," I said. Julian frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "We have not even cut the cake yet." "Enjoy the cake, Julian. The bill is closed." I turned around and walked out of the room. I did not wait for his response. I did not pause to observe Richard's reaction. I walked straight through the main hotel lobby, pushed through the revolving glass doors, and handed my ticket to the outside valet. The drive back to my townhouse took exactly 28 minutes. The route followed the edge of the bay, the dark water reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. During that drive, a profound psychological shift occurred within my mind. When a normal person experiences a betrayal of this magnitude from the person they intend to marry, they might break down. They might call their best friends to vent their frustration. They might pull their vehicle over to the shoulder of the highway and hyperventilate against the steering wheel. I did none of those things. I am a supply chain director. My daily professional existence revolves around risk management, identifying fraudulent vendors, mitigating systemic losses, and enforcing strict contract compliance. When a medical supplier delivers a batch of defective surgical equipment to my hospital network, I do not weep over the broken shipment. I freeze their operational accounts. I pull their initial signed contract. I run a forensic audit on their delivery history to determine exactly how long they have been cutting corners. I treat the betrayal not as an emotional wound, but as a critical data failure that requires immediate, decisive correction. Julian was no longer my fiancé. He was a defective vendor. My brain began processing the variables. I analyzed Richard's behavior at the dinner table. True generational wealth does not behave with that level of insecurity. People who possess actual financial capital do not need to publicly humiliate a tradesman to feel secure in their societal status. They do not bribe a maitre d' to steal chairs from the people funding the event. That specific brand of aggressive territorial snobbery is not a byproduct of wealth. It is a camouflage mechanism for poverty. Richard was performing a role. Brenda was acting a part. They were projecting an aggressive, hostile illusion of superiority to prevent anyone from looking too closely at their actual balance sheet. They needed to establish immediate, unquestionable dominance over my family because my family represented a threat to their survival. Tom and Sarah had actual liquidity. Julian's family needed to subjugate the host organism before the host realized they were being bled dry. I parked my car in my driveway. I turned off the ignition. The engine clicked softly as it cooled down in the night air. The silence inside the cabin was sharp and highly functional. I realized the missing chairs were just a surface symptom of a much deeper disease. If Julian and his parents were willing to orchestrate a public humiliation simply to secure a free dinner, what else were they hiding behind closed doors? Julian and I shared a household expense account. We had signed a venue contract for a wedding scheduled 6 months away. We had commingled our digital footprints across multiple platforms. I stepped out of my vehicle. I locked the doors. I walked up the paved pathway to my front door with a singular, defined objective. I was going to open my laptop. I was going to pull every digital record, every bank statement, and every contract associated with Julian's name. I was going to locate the rot hiding behind their designer labels. I unlocked the front door of my townhouse. The security system chimed twice, a familiar and grounding sound. I walked past the dark living room and headed straight for the home office. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat down at my glass desk, opened my laptop, and watched the screen illuminate the quiet room. The conflict had shifted. The battlefield was no longer a rented hotel dining room filled with arrogant people. The battlefield was now a digital ledger, and data does not lie. Julian and I maintained a specific financial architecture throughout our relationship. We established a joint checking account early on to handle shared household utilities, groceries, and the monthly rent for his downtown apartment. However, I insisted on keeping my primary assets entirely separate. My investment portfolios, my retirement accounts, and my high-yield savings remained under my exclusive control. Julian called this division a lack of faith when I first proposed it. He argued that married couples should pool all resources to build a unified life. I called it standard operating procedure. My parents, Tom and Sarah, built their commercial heating and cooling company by never over-leveraging themselves and always maintaining clear accounting boundaries. They instilled that discipline in me. Tonight, that boundary was the only firewall protecting my net worth from a man I now recognized as a systemic risk. I opened my web browser. I did not start by checking our shared household account. A thief does not steal from the petty cash drawer when they are planning a heist. They go after the major contracts. I navigated directly to the wedding planner portal. We had signed the master vendor agreement 14 days prior. The original budget was set at a logical $42,000, a number we agreed was manageable based on our projected dual incomes. I clicked on the billing tab. The web page loading icon spun for a fraction of a second. The new balance rendered in bold black text across the top of the dashboard. $77,000. I leaned closer to the monitor. I downloaded the revised contract PDF to my hard drive. I opened the document and reviewed the itemized line items. Julian had initiated a massive revision 3 days after our initial signature. He did not consult me. He simply logged in and began altering the architecture of the event. He added a premium imported liquor package, overriding the standard open bar we had selected. He requested an interactive caviar station, complete with a dedicated chef and imported garnishes. He upgraded the floral arrangements, deleting the local seasonal blooms I chose and replacing them with imported white orchids that required specialized, climate-controlled transport. The total variance for these unapproved luxury additions was exactly $35,000. My eyes scanned down to the payment authorization section at the bottom of the final page. The deposit for this newly fabricated luxury experience was not charged to our shared checking account. It was not routed through his personal debit card. The payment was processed through a Platinum Rewards credit card ending in 4 distinct digits I did not recognize. The billing profile listed the cardholders as Julian and Isabella. I do not possess a Platinum Rewards credit card with that specific financial institution. I opened a new browser tab. I logged into my personal credit monitoring service. I initiated a full, comprehensive credit pull. The security software authenticated my identity and generated the current report. I scrolled past my student loans, which were paid in full, and my pristine auto loan history. A new account appeared at the very top of the revolving liability column. It was an unsecured, high-interest credit card issued by a major national bank. The annual percentage rate was listed at 24.9%. The opening balance was already hovering near the maximum credit limit, verifying the $35,000 charge from the wedding venue. I needed to see the origination data. I navigated through the credit bureau interface to view the hard inquiry details. The application was submitted online 10 days ago at 2 in the afternoon. The digital footprint captured the IP address used to file the application. I cross-referenced that specific string of numbers. It matched the registered network of Julian's corporate office building. To secure an approval for that specific tier of credit, an applicant must provide a primary Social Security number. Julian did not use his own. His credit history was mediocre, burdened by late payments and high utilization on his existing retail cards. He bypassed the bank's risk assessment algorithms by inputting my Social Security number. He leveraged my 800-plus credit score to secure the funding for his caviar station. The realization settled over me with the heavy, cold weight of a final verdict. Julian did not just overspend. He committed identity theft. He executed felony wire fraud to upgrade a party. The puzzle pieces from the Tampa hotel snapped together. Richard, sneering at my father, was not a casual display of upper-class snobbery. It was a calculated psychological projection. Julian's family was financially hollow. They leased European luxury sedans and boasted about Miami country clubs. But the underlying structure of their life was built on leverage, debt, and deception. They projected an image of generational wealth to mask a reality of staggering insolvency. Richard needed to humiliate my father because Tom represented actual, tangible success. Brenda needed to steal the chairs because paying for her own seat was likely impossible. They targeted me not because Julian valued me as a partner, but because they identified my balance sheet as a viable host. I was never going to be a bride in their eyes. I was an underwriter for their lifestyle. They assumed I would be too embarrassed by the social pressure of a wedding to question the sudden influx of debt. They assumed I would just pay the bill to avoid a confrontation. I closed the credit report tab. I saved the fraudulent venue contract to a secure external drive. I was gathering the ammunition required to dismantle their operation. I needed to contact legal counsel and a forensic accountant in the morning. Before I could draft the initial email to my attorney, the screen of my smartphone illuminated on the glass desk. A text message arrived. Then a second, then a third. The notification chimes echoed in rapid succession. I picked up the device. The screen displayed names of extended family members, mutual friends, and Julian's sister. The text bubbles cascaded down the glass, containing words like disappointed, shocked, and unreasonable. The false narrative Julian and his parents were building had just been launched into the world, moving the conflict from my private office into the public domain. I woke up at 6 in the morning. The digital clock on my nightstand displayed the bright red numbers. I picked up my smartphone to check my email. The lock screen was heavily cluttered with notifications. 14 unread text messages awaited my attention. They were not from automated systems or hospital colleagues. They originated from mutual acquaintances, extended relatives, and people I previously considered friends. I opened the messaging application. A coordinated public relations offensive had been launched while I slept. Brenda and her son executed a calculated preemptive strike. They understood a fundamental rule of social warfare. Whoever establishes the narrative first usually controls the final verdict. I read a message from a bridesmaid named Katie. Her text said she was incredibly sorry my parents felt intimidated at the hotel. Another message from Julian's aunt expressed deep disappointment that my family caused a scene over a simple seating mix-up. They painted a very specific, highly fabricated portrait. According to their fiction, Tom and Sarah were uncultured, overwhelmed by Richard's sophisticated lifestyle, and threw a temper tantrum when the venue made a minor logistical error. I scrolled down to the most recent incoming communication. It was from the man who committed identity theft against me 9 hours prior. I opened Julian's text. It was a masterpiece of manipulative framing. Isabella, my dad is really hurt by how your parents acted last night, the message read. He was just trying to host a nice evening. We need to talk about Tom and Sarah paying for the floral upgrades as an apology to my family. I stared at the glowing pixels. The sheer audacity of the demand required a moment of clinical appreciation. He was not merely trying to cover his tracks regarding the $35,000 fraudulent charge I discovered on my credit report. He was actively attempting to extort my parents to pay for a portion of the crime he committed. He wanted the victims to finance their own robbery. I did not type a response. I did not defend my mother or my father. I selected the option to archive the entire conversation thread. Responding to a smear campaign validates the premise of the attack. In supply chain logistics, when a vendor is failing to meet their production quotas, they often blame the shipping company or the warehouse staff to distract from their own manufacturing defects. The psychology of a toxic family operates on the exact same principle. This is the mechanics of projection. They accuse you of precisely what they are doing to avoid detection. Julian's family claimed immense wealth, yet they were actively stealing my credit limit. They claimed high-class sophistication, yet they bribed a hotel worker to steal chairs from their hosts. By convincing our social circle that my parents were the unstable, hostile party, Brenda and Richard inoculated themselves against any future accusations I might level against them. If I announced Julian committed wire fraud today, the audience would simply assume I was being vindictive because my working-class parents were embarrassed at a dinner party. It is a highly effective strategy if the target is emotional. I am not emotional. I am an auditor. I needed hard data to dismantle their fiction. I dialed my father's cell phone. Tom answered on the second ring. I could hear the distinct hum of industrial ventilation fans in the background. He was already at the commercial heating and cooling warehouse, managing the morning dispatch for his technicians. He did not ask how I was feeling. He simply asked what I needed him to do. I explained the credit card fraud. I explained the $35,000 unapproved venue upgrade. Tom remained perfectly silent on the other end of the connection. His silence is never passive. It is the sound of processing critical information. I gave him my next directive. I asked him to run a quiet, comprehensive background check on Richard's boutique consulting firm. People like Richard routinely underestimate men like Tom. They see a guy wearing work boots and assume a lack of sophistication. What Richard failed to calculate is that a commercial HVAC owner who services 22 corporate office parks possesses a vast, invisible network of high-level contacts. My father regularly plays golf with commercial real estate developers, corporate bankers, and municipal zoning directors. Tom knows exactly who owns which building, which companies are breaking their commercial leases, and who is defaulting on their corporate loans. I told my father I needed the balance sheet of Richard's life. I needed to know if his business was actually generating revenue or if his entire existence was a leveraged illusion. Tom told me he would make a few phone calls to his contacts in the Miami commercial sector and have the data ready by Tuesday. He hung up the phone without another word. I sat at my glass desk. I picked up my phone again. I needed to ensure Julian felt secure in his current position. If a parasite senses the host is initiating a defense mechanism, they will detach and attempt to hide the damage. I had to maintain the illusion of compliance. I opened our archived text thread. I crafted a response designed to appeal to his ego and his assumption of my submissiveness. I typed, "I am just processing everything that happened. Let us meet for dinner this Friday with your parents to sort it all out and discuss the floral arrangements." I hit send. The delivery confirmation appeared below the text bubble. Julian replied within 60 seconds. He sent a thumbs-up icon, followed by a message saying he knew I would see reason. He took the bait completely. He assumed Friday would be a formal surrender. He assumed my parents would arrive with a checkbook to purchase his father's forgiveness. He had no idea that I was not scheduling a reconciliation dinner. I was scheduling a deposition. I just needed my father to acquire the financial records to complete the dossier. The trap was officially set, and the wait for the background check results began. I was at my desk on Tuesday morning, reviewing a procurement contract for surgical robotics, when my cell phone vibrated against the glass surface. The caller identification displayed my father. I closed the procurement file and answered the call. Tom does not believe in small talk during business hours. He operates on efficiency. He bypassed any standard morning greetings and immediately began reciting data from a legal pad. "I made the calls," my father stated, his voice clipping through the receiver with the steady cadence of a metronome. "I spoke with 2 commercial real estate brokers down in Miami, a regional bank executive I play golf with, and a title underwriter. Your prospective father-in-law is not a wealthy consultant. He is a financial ghost." I instructed Tom to give me the itemized breakdown. Richard ran a boutique advisory firm for a decade, Tom explained. He specialized in corporate synergy, or whatever vague terminology people use when they do not produce physical goods. 36 months ago, that firm filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The courts liquidated the company assets to satisfy outstanding vendor liabilities. Richard currently has no registered corporate entities, no active payroll, and 0 verifiable income streams. He is essentially unemployed, operating under the obsolete title of managing partner for a business that ceased to exist 3 years ago. I wrote the phrase Chapter 7 on my own legal pad. I asked my father how Richard was funding the country club memberships and the expensive dinners. "He is running a massive deficit," Tom replied. The regional banker pulled the public property records for their Miami estate. The house is currently in pre-foreclosure. Richard and Brenda have missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. The lender issued a formal notice of default 14 days ago. If they do not cure the arrears within 60 days, the bank will seize the property and evict them. My pen hovered over the paper. The image of Richard sitting at the hotel dining table, swirling a $140 glass of champagne and calling my family low class, flashed through my mind. He was drinking my money while actively losing his own shelter. The hypocrisy was so profound, it bordered on clinical delusion. "There is more," my father continued. "Brenda drives a leased European sedan. The vehicle financing division flagged the account for severe delinquency. She is 2 months behind on her lease obligations. The lender already dispatched the initial warning letter regarding vehicular repossession. They are living on fumes, Isabella. They are shifting credit balances, dodging collections, and utilizing whatever remaining social capital they possess to maintain the illusion of solvency." I absorbed the metrics. The puzzle was taking shape, but it still felt incomplete. Richard and Brenda were drowning in debt, which explained why they needed a wealthy target. However, it did not fully explain Julian's $35,000 identity theft. Julian needed a larger exit strategy than just a caviar station at a wedding. Tom paused. The line went quiet for 3 seconds. In my father's communication style, a pause indicates an incoming variable of high severity. "Yesterday afternoon," my father said, his tone dropping an octave, "I received a phone call from a man named Marcus. Marcus owns the 2nd largest commercial heating and cooling logistics operation in Orlando. He is my father's primary industry rival. They bid against each other for municipal contracts and corporate office parks. They respect each other professionally, but they are cutthroat competitors. Marcus called me as a professional courtesy," Tom explained. "He told me that your fiancé contacted him last week, requesting a private meeting." Julian drove to Marcus's corporate office. Julian asked him for a $50,000 bridge loan. I stopped writing. The pen rested motionless against the legal pad. A bridge loan is a short-term financing option utilized to cover immediate capital requirements until a long-term funding source becomes available. I asked my father what collateral Julian possibly offered to secure $50,000 from a veteran business owner. Julian told Marcus that he was marrying my daughter, Tom said, his voice sharpening like a freshly ground blade. Julian claimed that upon the execution of the marriage certificate, he was being drafted into the executive ownership structure of our company. He promised Marcus a guaranteed subcontracting pipeline for upcoming municipal bids, leveraging his imaginary future equity in my business to secure the cash. The sheer scale of the parasitism settled into my chest. Julian was not merely stealing my personal credit score. He was actively attempting to monetize my family's legacy. He intended to siphon funds from an industry rival by selling unauthorized access to my father's life's work. Julian planned to hand that $50,000 to Richard to cure the Miami estate default, thereby saving his parents from eviction. My engagement was a corporate acquisition strategy designed to rescue a bankrupt family. Suddenly, the missing chairs at the engagement party made perfect psychological sense. It was never a social faux pas. It was a calculated compliance test. When you intend to financially drain a host, you must first ascertain their tolerance for abuse. You have to break their boundaries early. If Julian and his parents could force my family to stand like hired help while I paid for their premium entrees, they would establish an immediate power dynamic. If I accepted that disrespect to keep the peace, I would have proven myself malleable. I would have demonstrated that I valued the social status of the relationship more than my own dignity. Once that compliance was established, the next step would be inevitable. 6 months after the wedding, Richard would tearfully confess his temporary liquidity issues. Julian would beg me to save his parents from losing their home. Because I had already been conditioned to absorb their mistreatment as a standard family duty, I would have drained my index funds to pay their mortgage. The missing chairs were the grooming phase of a massive financial extraction. I thanked my father for the intelligence report. I told him I would handle the extraction protocol. I terminated the call. I immediately dialed the phone number for a forensic accountant I utilized during complex hospital vendor audits. I requested an expedited, deep dive trace on all joint accounts associated with my residence. Next, I contacted a senior attorney specializing in corporate fraud and identity theft. I briefed the lawyer on the unauthorized credit card application, the forged venue contract, and the fraudulent loan solicitation involving Marcus. I spent the remainder of my lunch hour drafting the framework of a very specific document. It was not a breakup letter. It was a formal termination of services. I needed to construct a legally binding dossier that would isolate my assets, document the identity theft, and officially transfer all vendor liabilities directly to Julian. I prepared to finalize the paperwork for the upcoming Friday dinner, ensuring the impending trap possessed no structural weaknesses. Julian sent a text message at 2 p.m. on Wednesday. His digital tone possessed the brisk, commanding rhythm of a supervisor issuing a mandatory directive. Isabella, we are having a reconciliation dinner this Friday night at my father's country club in Miami, the message read. We need to clear the air regarding the hotel incident. Your parents must attend so they can formally apologize to my family for their behavior. Dress code is strictly enforced. The text contained multiple layers of psychological manipulation. He framed the event not as a mutual discussion, but as a disciplinary hearing where my parents were expected to submit to his father's authority. He chose his father's exclusive country club specifically because it was Richard's home turf. It was an environment designed to intimidate outsiders, with high membership fees, strict dress codes, and the quiet judgment of wealthy patrons. Julian assumed the setting would force my working-class parents to feel inherently inferior, thus accelerating their compliance and their impending apology. I read the message twice. I did not respond with anger. I did not point out the hypocrisy of demanding an apology from the victims of his family's orchestrated humiliation. I simply typed a single affirmative sentence. We will be there at 7. There is a distinct strategic brilliance in immediate, unquestioning agreement when dealing with a manipulator. Abusers operate on a predictable neurological loop. They initiate a conflict, they gauge your reaction, and they adjust their tactics based on your emotional output. If you argue, they gain a foothold to twist your logic. If you cry, they gain validation that they control your emotional state. However, if you agree instantly without any friction, their brains short-circuit the process. They automatically classify your sudden silence as total submission. They mistake a lack of resistance for a complete lack of defensive capability. Julian believed he had successfully broken my boundaries. He believed I had coerced my father into purchasing Richard's forgiveness. I spent the entirety of Thursday executing the operational framework for my response. I took a personal day from my hospital supply chain position. I drove directly to the downtown office of my corporate fraud attorney, a seasoned litigator named David. We spent 4 hours in a glass-walled conference room dissecting the digital evidence I had accumulated. David reviewed the high-interest credit card application. He traced the IP address back to Julian's corporate network. He examined the timestamp that proved my Social Security number was utilized without my physical presence or digital authorization. This is textbook identity theft, David confirmed, sliding the printouts across the polished mahogany table. He committed a federal offense to secure $35,000 in unsecured revolving credit. The bank will immediately initiate a fraud investigation once we file the formal dispute. We drafted 3 distinct, heavily documented legal instruments. The first document was a comprehensive cease and desist letter, forbidding Julian, Richard, Brenda, and any affiliated parties from contacting my family or my employer. The second document was a formal transfer of liability addressed to the wedding venue. It legally established that my signature on the upgraded catering and floral contract was a verified forgery, thereby placing the entire financial burden of the caviar station and imported orchids solely on Julian's shoulders. The third document was a finalized draft of a police report detailing the exact metrics of the wire fraud, ready for submission to the local authorities. I asked David to print 6 identical copies of the entire dossier on high-quality, heavyweight paper. I needed the physical presentation to reflect the severity of the contents. I took the stacks of paper and placed them inside 6 crisp, unmarked manila envelopes. I did not write names on the exterior. I sealed each flap with a single piece of clear tape. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Orlando. I sat in their living room with Tom, Sarah, and my brother Lucas. I laid one of the manila envelopes on the coffee table. I briefed them on the complete financial reality of Julian's family. I outlined the Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the impending foreclosure of the Miami estate, the delinquent vehicle lease, and the $50,000 loan solicitation targeting Tom's biggest competitor. My family did not yell. They did not express loud, theatrical outrage. They did not pace the room or demand immediate, violent retribution. People who build substantial wealth through decades of disciplined labor do not waste their energy on performative anger. They process the data, they assess the threat, and they execute the necessary countermeasures. Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and studied the manila envelope. Sarah simply nodded her head, her face an unreadable mask of calm determination. Lucas cracked his knuckles once, his posture tightening as he absorbed the sheer audacity of Julian's actions. I instructed them on the specific protocol for the country club dinner. I outlined the exact sequence of events. We would arrive on time. We would adhere strictly to the dress code. We would not engage in any preliminary arguments or defensive justifications. We would simply sit at the table and wait for Julian to initiate the discussion regarding the floral upgrades. We would allow them to perform their arrogance in public. Then, I would deploy the data. Friday evening arrived with the heavy, humid stillness typical of a Florida summer. I dressed in a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit. It was professional, understated, and armored. I placed the 6 manila envelopes into my structured leather tote bag. The bag was heavy, grounding my movements as I walked to my car. The drive from Orlando to Miami took 3.5 hours. The highway stretched out ahead, a ribbon of concrete slicing through the darkening landscape. The sunset painted the sky in vivid streaks of orange and bruised purple, casting long shadows across the dashboard. My parents and brother drove separately in Tom's 5-year-old Ford sedan, following closely behind my vehicle. The contrast between the serene, beautiful evening sky and the financial guillotine resting securely in my tote bag was sharp and profound. I was not driving to a reconciliation dinner. I was transporting a localized economic collapse directly to its source. The wrought iron gates of the Miami Country Club opened smoothly as my vehicle approached the security kiosk. I provided my name to the guard, an older gentleman in a crisp white uniform. He checked a clipboard, nodded once, and raised the heavy wooden boom. My father's Ford sedan followed directly behind my car. We navigated the winding, manicured driveway flanked by towering royal palms and perfectly symmetrical flower beds. The aesthetic of the entire property was designed to project exclusivity, tradition, and an impenetrable barrier against the outside world. I parked my car. Tom, Sarah, and Lucas exited their vehicle. My father wore a dark gray suit, my mother a simple, elegant navy dress, and my brother a tailored blazer. We did not look like the poor, low-class people Richard had described at the hotel engagement party. We looked like a board of directors arriving for a hostile corporate takeover. I adjusted the strap of my heavy leather tote bag, feeling the solid weight of the 6 manila envelopes inside. We walked through the double oak doors of the main clubhouse. The lobby was expansive, featuring a massive crystal chandelier and a polished marble floor that echoed our footsteps. A hostess, holding a leather-bound reservation book, greeted us immediately. I told her we were joining Richard's table. She smiled professionally and escorted us down a wide corridor lined with oil paintings of former club presidents. We entered the primary dining room. It was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the 18th hole of the golf course. The ambient noise was a low, sophisticated hum of clinking silverware and subdued conversations. The environment demanded a specific decorum, a quiet reverence for the wealth it housed. Julian, his parents, and his sister Chloe were already seated at a large circular table, positioned deliberately in the dead center of the room. It was the focal point of the dining area, highly visible to everyone present. This time, there were exactly enough chairs for all 8 of us. However, the psychological seating arrangement was intentionally skewed to establish immediate dominance. Richard occupied the head of the table, facing the entrance. Julian sat to his right, Brenda to his left. They formed a unified block. When we approached the table, Richard did not stand to greet my parents. He did not offer his hand to my father. He remained seated, swirling a glass of amber liquid over a single large ice cube. Brenda offered a thin, patronizing smile that did not reach her eyes. Chloe stared at her smartphone, aggressively ignoring our arrival. Julian stood up briefly. He did not step around the table to kiss me or pull out a chair for my mother. He merely gestured to the 4 empty seats positioned opposite his family block. "I am glad you guys finally came to your senses," Julian said. His voice carried a condescending corporate tone. It was the cadence of a manager addressing a group of reprimanded subordinates who had successfully completed a probationary period. He settled back into his chair, adjusted his cuffs, and steepled his fingers on the white linen tablecloth. "Let us put the unpleasantness of the engagement party behind us," Julian continued. "We are all adults here. We can acknowledge that mistakes were made and emotions ran high." Julian utilized the passive voice specifically to avoid taking any personal accountability. He did not say his mother bribed a waiter to steal chairs. He said mistakes were made. He did not apologize for his father calling my family low class. He said emotions ran high. He framed the narrative to imply mutual fault, a shared burden of guilt that required my family to capitulate to restore harmony. I sat down. Tom took the seat to my left, Sarah to my right, and Lucas beside my mother. I placed my heavy tote bag on the floor next to my chair. I did not speak. I simply folded my hands on the table and waited. Richard took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch. He set the heavy crystal glass down with a soft thud. He looked directly at my father, bypassing me entirely. In Richard's worldview, Tom was the only individual with the authority to negotiate a financial settlement. I was merely the conduit through which he planned to extract Tom's resources. "Tom," Richard began, his voice projecting a false camaraderie, "Julian and Isabella are building a life together. That requires a strong foundation, a unified front. Now, the scene your family caused at the hotel was frankly embarrassing for us. My colleagues frequently dine at that establishment. It reflects poorly on our standing in the community." My father did not flinch. He did not blink. He maintained a neutral, relaxed posture, staring back at Richard with the steady gaze of a man evaluating a faulty compressor unit. "However," Richard continued, leaning forward slightly, Julian wanted to surprise Isabella with a gesture of goodwill. He upgraded the wedding venue package, he added a premium open bar, an interactive caviar station, and imported floral arrangements. It is a $35,000 enhancement to ensure the event meets the standards of this family. Richard paused, allowing the astronomical dollar amount to hang in the air. "Since you and Sarah clearly struggle with the social protocols of our circle," Richard said, his tone dripping with paternalistic condescension, "I think it would be a highly appropriate gesture of good faith if you covered that $35,000 upgrade. Consider it an apology for your behavior last week. It will clear the slate and allow us to move forward as a cohesive family unit." The audacity of the extortion attempt was breathtaking. Richard was demanding that a man he publicly humiliated pay $35,000 to finance his son's identity theft. Furthermore, he was framing this extortion as an act of grace, a generous opportunity for my father to purchase his way back into Richard's good graces. I observed the surrounding tables. The dining room was not empty. Several older couples and groups of businessmen occupied the adjacent booths. Because Richard had deliberately selected the center table and was projecting his voice to ensure Tom felt the full weight of his authority, the neighboring club members were subtly listening. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations dipped in volume. Richard was performing for his peers. He was actively demonstrating his dominance over his blue-collar in-laws, establishing a public hierarchy where he reigned supreme. I did not interrupt him. I did not immediately pull the manila envelopes from my bag. I let the silence stretch across the table. I allowed Richard to bask in his perceived victory. Overconfidence is the primary vulnerability of a predator. When they believe they have successfully cornered their prey, they drop their guard entirely. I waited for the exact moment when Richard felt completely invincible. I needed his arrogance to peak before I initiated the systemic collapse of his fabricated empire. The silence at the table thickened, growing dense and palpable beneath the soft glow of the dining room chandeliers. Richard held his position, his chin raised, waiting for my father to capitulate. Julian mirrored his father's posture, a smug, expectant expression settling over his features. Brenda picked up a small silver spoon, adjusted it by a fraction of an inch next to her bread plate, and offered a sigh designed to communicate her immense patience. My father, Tom, did not reach for his wallet. He did not exhibit any physiological signs of stress or intimidation. A man who has spent 2 decades staring down aggressive general contractors over municipal zoning disputes does not crumble because a man holding a scotch glass demands a ransom. Tom leaned forward, resting his forearms on the white linen. He looked directly into Richard's eyes. "We are not paying for the wedding, Richard," my father said. His voice was mild. It carried no anger, no defensiveness, and no hesitation. It was the factual delivery of a non-negotiable reality. He delivered the sentence with the same emotional detachment one might use to decline an extended warranty on a kitchen appliance. Brenda gasped. It was a sharp, highly theatrical intake of air, loud enough to draw the attention of a waiter standing near the service station. She clapped a hand over her chest, feigning shock at the sheer insolence of my father's refusal. Julian's smug expression evaporated instantly. A dark, angry flush crept up his neck and spread rapidly across his jawline. The realization that his engineered extortion plot was failing in front of his parents triggered an immediate defensive response. He slammed his palm flat against the table, causing the silverware to rattle against the china. "Isabella," Julian snapped, his voice rising in volume, cracking the quiet atmosphere of the room, "talk to your father. Get him under control. This is exactly the kind of uncultured, stubborn behavior that embarrassed us at the hotel. You need to explain to him how things work in this family." I did not look at my father. I did not need to. The execution protocol was already established. I reached down to the floor beside my chair. I unzipped the main compartment of my structured leather tote bag. My fingers closed around the thick stack of premium heavy stock paper. I pulled the 6 crisp, unbranded manila envelopes from the bag and placed them squarely on the table in front of me. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice to match Julian's sudden aggression. When you hold all the leverage, elevating your volume is a tactical error. It signals a loss of control. I dropped my vocal register to the exact, clinical, unshakable pitch I utilize when informing a hospital supplier that their primary contract has been terminated for cause. I am not talking to my father, Julian, I said. I am talking to you. I picked up the first manila envelope. I slid it across the smooth surface of the tablecloth directly toward Julian. It came to a stop, resting against the base of his water glass. I picked up the second envelope and pushed it toward Richard. I took the third envelope and slid it toward Brenda. The remaining 3 envelopes stayed stacked in front of me, a visual representation of the unyielding data I possessed. At the hotel engagement party, Richard, you loudly stated that my family was poor and low class, I said. I projected my voice just enough to ensure the syllables cleared the perimeter of our table. The neighboring country club members, the peers Richard desperately needed to impress, abruptly ceased their subdued conversations. The ambient noise in our immediate vicinity dropped to a dead, heavy quiet. I continued, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with Julian. You agreed with your father's assessment, Julian. You laughed. You allowed my parents to stand near a kitchen door while you consumed a dinner I financed. Your primary argument was that my family lacked the necessary financial and social sophistication to share a table with yours. Julian stared at the unmarked envelope resting against his glass. The angry flush on his neck began to recede, replaced by a sudden, stark pallor. He recognized the tone of my voice. He had heard me use it on business calls when I was cornering a fraudulent vendor. He knew, on a visceral level, that a trap had just snapped shut. So I decided to take your father's assessment seriously, I said, leaning back in my chair. I decided to conduct a comprehensive audit of our shared finances. I needed to see exactly how much class, how much generational wealth, and how much financial security I was marrying into. Richard scoffed. He attempted to regain control of the narrative through sheer arrogance. This is ridiculous, Richard muttered, pushing the envelope away with a flick of his index finger. I will not be subjected to a performance by a hysterical woman at my own country club. Julian, tell the waiter to bring the check for their drinks. They are leaving. Nobody is leaving until you open the envelopes, my father stated quietly. Tom's intervention was perfectly timed. It blocked Richard's exit strategy and reinforced the perimeter. Richard looked at Tom, then at the envelope, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossing his features for the first time all evening. Julian, I said, breaking the brief standoff, open the envelope, review the findings of the audit. The tension in the dining room spiked. The atmosphere shifted from awkward social conflict to the sharp, rigid anticipation of an impending collision. The audience at the surrounding tables was entirely captivated. Julian hesitated. His hand hovered over the manila paper. He looked at his father, seeking a directive, but Richard was staring at his own sealed envelope with a narrowing gaze. Julian swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against his collar. He reached out, his fingers slightly unsteady, and broke the clear tape sealing the flap. He slid the thick stack of heavily documented legal instruments out onto the white tablecloth. He stared at the top page. The immediate physical reaction confirmed the lethality of the data. His eyes widened, his breathing hitched, and the remaining color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a man standing on the tracks facing an oncoming train. The public execution of their fabricated reality had officially commenced. Julian stared at the first document. His eyes tracked across the heavy black ink, processing the bank logo, the high-interest annual percentage rate, and the massive pending balance. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. He did not look up. He kept his gaze locked on the paper, paralyzed by the sudden materialization of his own crime. Julian, I said. My voice was clear, carrying the distinct acoustic edge of a judge reading a verdict. I did not rush the delivery. I ensured every single syllable was audible to the surrounding tables. That is the current statement for the Platinum Rewards credit card you opened 10 days ago, I stated. You submitted the application from your corporate network. You bypassed the bank's risk assessment by utilizing my Social Security number without my knowledge or my consent. You charged exactly $35,000 to that unauthorized account to finance a luxury wedding package for an event I am no longer attending. Julian finally looked up. His face was chalk white, devoid of the aggressive arrogance he had projected minutes earlier. He opened his mouth, his jaw working as he scrambled to formulate a defense. "Isabella, baby, please," Julian stammered, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Keep your voice down. It was a surprise. I wanted to surprise you with the caviar and the orchids. I was going to pay it off when my bonus hit. I was just trying to give you the wedding you deserved." I did not let the excuse breathe. I cut him off with the precision of a scalpel. Fraud is not a surprise, Julian. Identity theft is a felony. The word felony struck the center of the table like a physical blow. Brenda gasped again, but this time there was no theatricality behind the sound. It was the sharp, authentic intake of air from a woman watching a trap close around her son. I shifted my focus to the head of the table. I looked directly at Julian's father. Richard's arrogant smirk had completely vanished. The patronizing patriarch who demanded $35,000 from my father was gone. In his place sat an older man with rigid posture, his fingers gripping his crystal scotch glass so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Open your envelope, Richard," I instructed. He did not move. He stared at the manila folder resting near his plate as if it were an explosive device. "If you do not open it, I will simply recite the contents from memory," I said, maintaining the unbroken eye contact. I have a very strong memory for data. Richard slowly reached out. He broke the seal. He pulled the identical stack of legal instruments from the envelope. "Turn to page 2, Richard," I commanded. He flipped the top sheet over. I watched his eyes scan the document. I watched the realization hit him that his carefully constructed fortress of superiority was entirely transparent. "That is a public record of the pre-foreclosure notice filed against your Miami estate 14 days ago," I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the dining room. "It details 3 consecutive missed mortgage payments. Directly beneath that is the delinquency report from the Vehicular Financing Division regarding Brenda's leased European sedan. She is 60 days in arrears. The lender has already initiated the preliminary repossession protocol." The dining room surrounding us was now dead silent. The low hum of conversation had ceased entirely. In an environment like an exclusive country club, reputation and perceived wealth are the primary currencies. Gossip regarding financial instability spreads faster than a contagion. The peers Richard desperately sought to impress were actively witnessing his financial autopsy. I did not stop. The audit required a complete accounting of the liabilities. "You called my family poor, Richard. You called my father low class because he works with his hands. Let us review the actual balance sheets," I said. I recited the metrics with cold, unyielding accuracy. My father operates a commercial logistics company that holds 0 debt. He possesses 7 figures in highly liquid index funds. You operated a boutique consulting firm that filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation 36 months ago. My family drives vehicles they own outright. Your family leases luxury cars you cannot afford to fuel. I paused, allowing the contrast to settle over the table. "You demanded that my father pay $35,000 to apologize to you," I continued. "You attempted to extort a man who possesses actual wealth to cover the cost of a crime your son committed simply because you needed to maintain the illusion that you still belong in this country club." I turned my attention back to Julian, whose head had dropped to stare at his lap. "You did not solicit a $50,000 bridge loan from my father's industry rival because you are a savvy businessman, Julian," I said, revealing the final piece of the dossier. "You solicited that loan by falsely claiming equity in my family's company because you were desperate to secure the cash to save your parents from eviction. My engagement ring was not a promise of marriage. It was a corporate acquisition strategy designed to rescue a bankrupt family." The entire architecture of their deception was laid bare on the white linen tablecloth. I exposed the foundational truth of their behavior. They did not steal the chairs at the Tampa hotel because they felt socially superior to my parents. They did not act with aggression because they possessed high standards. They took the chairs because they were desperate, starving parasites, I stated, summarizing the psychological reality. You attempted to establish immediate, unquestionable dominance over my family because you identified us as a viable host. You needed to break my boundaries early so I would willingly absorb your massive, compounding debts under the guise of family duty. The data delivery was complete. The math was indisputable. The public execution of their fabricated reality had concluded. However, a toxic system rarely accepts defeat with grace. When confronted with undeniable evidence of their own failure, the individuals within that system will always turn on each other to secure their own survival, initiating the final, chaotic implosion of their alliance. The silence in the dining room hung suspended for a fraction of a second before the internal pressure of the exposed secrets detonated. The table did not erupt in a unified front against me. When a toxic ecosystem is deprived of its external host, the organisms within that system immediately turn on one another to secure their own survival. The facade of the wealthy, cohesive Miami family fractured along its fault lines in real time. Brenda dropped her silver spoon. It struck the edge of her bread plate with a harsh, metallic clatter. She did not look at me. She stared down at the black ink of the pre-foreclosure notice resting in front of her husband. The manufactured upper-crust affectation she utilized to intimidate service workers evaporated. Her voice became shrill, carrying a desperate, panicked frequency. "You said the mortgage was handled," Brenda demanded, her eyes darting from the legal document to Richard's face. "You told me you liquidated a minor asset portfolio to cover the arrears last month. You swore the bank was satisfied." Richard did not offer reassurance. He did not play the role of the protective patriarch calming his wife. His ego, the primary engine of his entire personality, had just been publicly dismantled in front of the exact demographic he spent his life trying to impress. He turned his head slowly. He glared at Brenda with a look of pure, unvarnished contempt. "Shut up, Brenda," Richard snarled, his voice a low, gravelly threat. "Keep your mouth closed. You know nothing about corporate liquidity or asset management." Brenda shrank back into her chair, her posture collapsing. The designer labels she wore suddenly resembled a poorly tailored costume on an actor who had just forgotten her lines. The illusion of her superiority dissolved, leaving only the reality of a woman discovering she was weeks away from eviction. Julian recognized the sinking ship. He assessed the structural damage to his father's authority and immediately attempted to board a lifeboat. He reached across the white linen tablecloth, extending his arm to grasp my hand. I anticipated the physical maneuver. I pulled my hand back, resting my fingers near the base of my water glass, denying him the tactile connection he sought. Deprived of physical leverage, Julian pivoted instantly to victimhood. It was a behavioral pattern I should have recognized much earlier in our relationship. Throughout his career, Julian's professional history consisted of lateral moves and terminated employment contracts. Every time he failed to secure a promotion or missed a quarterly sales quota, he produced a highly detailed narrative, blaming a jealous manager or a sabotaging coworker. Accountability was a foreign concept to his neurological wiring. He survived by designating himself a casualty of someone else's malice. "Isabella, baby, listen to me," Julian pleaded. His vocal pitch rose, adopting the desperate cadence of a man begging for a pardon. He shifted his target, pointing a trembling index finger directly at his father. "My dad pressured me into upgrading the wedding," Julian stammered, his words tumbling out in a rapid, disjointed sequence. "He told me we needed the interactive caviar station and the imported orchids to impress his consulting clients. He said his high-level contacts expected a specific standard of luxury. He forced me to sign those contracts. He told me it was an investment in our future social standing. I was just trying to protect you from his demands. I was trying to keep the peace." The betrayal was swift and surgical. Julian offered his own father to the wolves to salvage his relationship with my bank accounts. Richard slammed his open palm flat against the table. The sudden impact caused the silverware to jump. The single large ice cube in his scotch glass rattled violently against the crystal. The patriarchal dynamic shattered. A king without a kingdom was now actively fighting his own heir for the remaining scraps of their dignity. "You are a weak liar," Richard spit at his son. He leaned across the table, his face contorted with rage. "Do not place your criminal incompetence on my shoulders. You stole her credit because you cannot secure a basic commercial loan on your own merit. You are a financial failure, Julian. You always have been." The argument escalated, their voices overlapping, their accusations flying across the table like shrapnel. They fought over the exact timeline of the bankruptcy, the missing car payments, and the origin of the fraudulent $50,000 loan solicitation. They stripped away their familial loyalty, exposing the transactional, parasitic nature of their bond to everyone in the room. My family did not intervene. We did not raise our voices to shout over their bickering. We simply watched. Tom picked up his water glass, took a measured, unhurried sip, and set it down quietly on the linen. He watched Richard unravel with the calm, analytical gaze of a contractor assessing a demolished building site. Sarah sat beside him, her posture flawless, observing Brenda's panic without a single trace of pity. Lucas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. A distinct, highly satisfied smirk touched the corner of my brother's mouth. This is the profound beauty of deploying raw, undeniable data against manipulators. It requires zero emotional maintenance. You do not need to argue your point. You do not need to justify your anger. Once you present the math, the fraudulent structure destroys itself. The energy they previously utilized to maintain their collective illusion is instantly redirected into destroying each other. I waited for a brief lull in their shouting match. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping softly against the polished floor. I stood up. Julian stopped arguing with his father. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in his chest. He assumed my standing was a prelude to a retreat, a sign that the public spectacle had overwhelmed me and I was ready to negotiate a private surrender. I reached over with my right hand. I grasped the platinum and diamond engagement ring encircling my left ring finger. The gemstone caught the light of the chandelier above us. I slid the metal over my knuckle. I held the ring suspended over the center of the table for a fraction of a second. I opened my fingers. The ring dropped. It landed directly on top of the Miami property pre-foreclosure notice. The heavy metal struck the glossy paper and the mahogany table beneath it with a sharp, resonant clink. The sound severed the final tie between our lives. The third document located in your manila envelope is a formal transfer of liability, I stated. My voice was devoid of malice, anger, or sorrow. It was the voice of a director executing a final contract termination. I notified the venue ownership that you forged my signature on the upgraded catering and floral contracts, I explained, looking down at Julian's pale, terrified face. The event manager possesses my actual, verified signature on file from the original master agreement. They compared the documents. They voided your fraudulent additions from my account. You are now legally and solely responsible for the $35,000 balance you authorized. The venue's legal department is preparing to pursue you for the non-refundable deposits. Julian stared at the ring resting on the foreclosure notice. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The realization of his financial ruin paralyzed his vocal cords. He possessed no leverage, no host, and no escape route. "Have a nice dinner," I said. I picked up my structured leather tote bag. The bag felt remarkably light. The heavy burden of their secrets, their debts, and their arrogant illusions was no longer mine to carry. The data was delivered, the audit was closed. The only remaining action was the physical extraction from the blast radius. I turned away from the circular table in the center of the dining room. I did not look back at Julian. I did not glance at Brenda or Richard or Chloe. The dramatic conclusion of their internal argument was no longer my concern. My parents and my brother rose from their chairs simultaneously, a synchronized and quiet departure. We walked down the wide corridor, our footsteps steady and unhurried on the polished marble floor. Behind us, the ambient noise of the country club shattered completely. Richard's voice spiked, a harsh, guttural shout that cut through the refined atmosphere. A waiter had apparently approached their table to present the check for the expensive scotch and the appetizers they consumed before our arrival. Richard was loudly disputing the charges, his performance of wealth crumbling under the immediate pressure of a $200 bar tab. The irony was profound. The man who previously attempted to extort my father for $35,000 was now aggressively haggling with a service worker over a beverage invoice. We passed the oil paintings of the former club presidents lining the hallway. The hostess at the front desk stared at us, her eyes wide, holding the leather-bound reservation book tightly against her chest. She had clearly heard the commotion echoing from the primary dining area. I offered her a brief, polite nod as we exited through the double oak doors. The heavy glass doors swung shut, sealing the chaos inside the building. The warm, humid Florida evening air hit my face instantly. When a long-term relationship ends abruptly, societal narratives dictate a period of profound mourning. Books and films condition us to expect a dramatic physical collapse, a dramatic display of heartbreak, or a lengthy period of tearful isolation. However, the physical sensation I experienced stepping onto the manicured brick driveway was entirely different. It was not heartbreak. It was not grief. It was the distinct, undeniable sensation of weightlessness. For the past 18 months, I had been unknowingly carrying the suffocating burden of an entire family's financial desperation. The subtle manipulation, the gaslighting, the constant draining effort to ignore the red flags and maintain the peace had taken a massive psychological toll. Dropping the engagement ring onto the foreclosure notice felt like unbuckling a heavy lead vest and letting it fall to the floor. My lungs expanded fully, my posture straightened. The night air smelled faintly of salt and blooming jasmine, not the stagnant, suffocating odor of expensive scotch and lies. The valet attendant jogged over immediately, retrieving my car keys from his podium. He brought my vehicle around first, followed closely by my father's sedan. I tipped the attendant, slid into the driver's seat, and started the ignition. The engine hummed to life. I merged onto the main highway, heading north toward Orlando. My cell phone rested in the center console. I anticipated a barrage of incoming calls from Julian. I expected the frantic texts, the desperate voicemails, and the immediate pivot to extreme victimhood. A parasite rarely accepts detachment without a struggle. I accessed the settings on my device. I initiated a total communication blockade. I blocked Julian's personal number, his corporate cell phone, Richard's contact information, and Brenda's device. I locked down my social media profiles to the highest privacy settings. I severed the digital tether completely. 30 minutes into the drive, my car speakers chimed, indicating an incoming call via Bluetooth. The caller identification displayed my father. I accepted the connection. Tom's voice filled the cabin of my vehicle. He did not ask if I was crying. He did not ask if I was emotionally devastated by the confrontation. My father understands the mechanics of a bad investment better than anyone. That was clinical, Isabella, Tom stated. His tone contained a rare, deep current of genuine amusement. He let out a sudden, sharp bark of laughter. It was a rich, authentic sound that echoed the immense relief we all felt. I have terminated hundreds of subcontractors in my career, but I have never witnessed a cleaner execution. You dismantled a hostile takeover with a legal pad and a manila folder. I am incredibly proud of your precision. I smiled, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. I thanked him for acquiring the intelligence regarding the bankruptcy and the fraudulent loan solicitation. We operated as a unified front, relying on data rather than emotion, and the strategy proved flawless. "We are pulling off the highway at the next exit," Tom announced, his voice shifting back to its usual authoritative cadence. There is a local diner a few miles down the access road, the kind with vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. I am buying dinner. We need to officially celebrate the conclusion of a terrible merger. I agreed immediately. I followed the taillights of his sedan down the exit ramp. The diner was a stark contrast to the pretentious Miami country club. It was brightly lit with fluorescent tubes, the air smelling strongly of frying bacon and strong coffee. A waitress named Dottie, wearing a faded pink uniform, pointed us toward a large corner booth. We sat down. The menus were laminated and slightly sticky. The silverware was rolled in paper napkins. We ordered 4 classic cheeseburgers, a massive plate of French fries, and milkshakes. We did not discuss Julian or his family during the meal. The topic was officially closed. We talked about Lucas's upcoming college exams. We discussed a new municipal contract my father was bidding on. We laughed loudly when my mother attempted to steal a fry from my plate. The environment was grounded, chaotic, and entirely authentic. It reinforced the core theme of the evening with undeniable clarity. Real class is not defined by sipping $140 champagne while wearing a designer suit you cannot afford. Real class is not established by stealing chairs from a hotel staff or insulting a tradesman to mask your own financial incompetence. True wealth is the ability to sit in a vinyl diner booth with the people who love you, eat a $5 burger, and know with absolute certainty that you own every single aspect of your life outright. Integrity is the ultimate currency, and my family possessed an unlimited supply. The celebration was brief and satisfying. However, the legal and financial fallout from the data I deployed at the country club was only just beginning to manifest. The shockwave of the identity theft and the canceled wedding contracts was traveling rapidly toward Julian's remaining assets, promising a devastating series of consequences that would hit him before the week concluded. 14 days elapsed since the dinner in Miami. Time does not heal structural financial damage. It merely provides the necessary runway for the consequences to compound and ultimately detonate. The legal and economic fallout from the data I deployed hit Julian and his parents with the precise, unavoidable force of a freight train. My attorney, David, submitted the comprehensive identity theft package to the National Bank precisely at 8 a.m. the following Monday. Financial institutions do not operate on empathy or social grace. They operate on algorithms, risk mitigation, and strict federal compliance. The fraud division immediately flagged the newly issued Platinum Rewards account. They audited the application timeline. They verified the digital footprint, matching the originating IP address directly to Julian's corporate workstation. The bank presented Julian with a stark, binary ultimatum. The institution would either refer the case to federal authorities for criminal wire fraud prosecution, or he could instantly cure the unauthorized $35,000 balance in full. Faced with the imminent threat of a felony indictment and potential incarceration, Julian panicked. He was forced to liquidate his entire existence. He drained his meager personal savings account. He emptied his checking balance. He liquidated a poorly funded employee retirement portfolio, absorbing the severe early withdrawal penalties and the associated tax liabilities. He transferred every available cent he possessed to the credit card company to cover the fraudulent charges and the subsequent banking fines. He avoided a criminal trial, but he achieved total, unrecoverable insolvency. He was financially neutralized. The collateral damage rapidly extended to the Tampa Boutique Hotel. The venue management received my formal transfer of liability via certified mail. The hospitality industry operates on strict profit margins and zero tolerance for vendor deception. The event coordinator, Chloe, cross-referenced the signature on the lavish upgrade addendum with my authentic signature on the original master contract. The forgery was undeniable. Realizing the primary underwriter had legally severed all ties, the hotel finance department initiated their own defense protocols. They audited Julian's remaining credit profile. They recognized he possessed no capital to fund a $77,000 luxury event. The venue unilaterally canceled the wedding reservation, citing a gross breach of the master agreement. Furthermore, they invoked the penalty clause hidden deep within the contract terms. They retained the initial $1,500 non-refundable deposit I originally supplied, allocating it as liquidated damages. Julian lost the caviar station. he lost the imported orchids. He lost the venue entirely, leaving him with zero leverage and a staggering deficit. While Julian faced institutional reckoning, his father faced social execution. Richard's entire identity was inextricably linked to the Miami golf establishment. For decades, he utilized that specific environment to project an aura of untouchable prestige. However, elite organizations despise public vulgarity. They despise financial insolvency even more. The loud, aggressive altercation Richard instigated with the service staff over a beverage invoice prompted an immediate committee review. This incident, combined with the public broadcast of his Chapter 7 bankruptcy and his pre-foreclosure status, triggered a fatal shift in his social standing. The surrounding patrons who overheard my data delivery did not keep that intelligence private. Gossip functions as the primary currency of the idle elite. Within days, the whispers saturated the locker rooms and the dining terraces. The board of directors issued a formal notice suspending Richard's privileges, pending an official review of his membership dues and general standing. The gates were locked against him. The men he previously golfed with stopped returning his calls. His emails to corporate contacts went unanswered. Richard became a ghost in the only community that ever validated his inflated ego. He was exiled from his own fabricated kingdom. Consequently, the smear campaign Brenda meticulously orchestrated collapsed under the weight of empirical reality. You cannot maintain a fiction of aristocratic superiority when your son is under a bank investigation and your husband is banned from the local clubhouse. The false narrative portraying my parents as uncultured aggressors evaporated. The truth always surfaces when the money stops flowing. The mutual acquaintances, the extended relatives, and the former bridesmaids who sent me demanding text messages 2 weeks prior suddenly experienced a drastic shift in perspective. As the details of the canceled wedding and the identity theft circulated through our shared social network, my phone began cataloging a new influx of digital communications. The tone of these new messages shifted from condescending to highly embarrassed. The individuals who previously demanded I apologize to Richard now scrambled to distance themselves from his sinking ship. They claimed profound ignorance. They stated Brenda fed them a manipulated story. They insisted they had no idea Julian was capable of such deceit. They flooded my inbox with lengthy paragraphs asking for my forgiveness and requesting coffee dates to smooth things over. I maintained the communication blockade. I did not type a single reply. I did not grant them the grace of my absolution. In my professional capacity, I evaluate vendor relationships based on baseline reliability. Personal relationships require a similar metric of fundamental trust. If an individual requires you to supply a forensic audit just to prove you are not the villain in a fabricated story, they are not your ally. People who demand you prove your innocence before extending basic respect are not friends. They are spectators. They are an audience consuming your life for entertainment, waiting to see which side produces the most compelling drama. I do not perform for audiences, and I do not reinstate canceled contracts. I archived their apologies and deleted their contact information from my device. The structural collapse of Julian's family was comprehensive. They lost their social standing, their credit limits, and their designated scapegoat. When a parasite is fully detached and starving, it does not perish quietly. It attempts a final, desperate reattachment to any available life source. The Miami property finally crossed the legal threshold for seizure. The bank initiated the physical eviction protocol for the estate. Julian was effectively homeless, bankrupt, and drowning in the wreckage of his own design. Driven by sheer panic and a lack of viable alternatives, he decided to breach my final boundary. He bypassed the digital blockade, bypassed the legal warnings, and targeted the one location where he knew I could not simply drive away. He decided to corner me at my physical workplace. Exactly 30 days elapsed since the confrontation at the country club. The digital calendar on my workstation indicated a Tuesday morning. The passage of a single month often serves as a ruthless incubator for structural financial collapse. When a heavy influx of capital suddenly halts, the dependent organisms quickly exhaust their remaining reserves. I was reviewing a quarterly logistics report in my office when the internal telephone line rang. The caller identification display indicated the main reception desk, situated on the ground floor. My administrative environment is not a standard corporate office. I operate within the supply chain division of a major regional hospital network. We manage millions of dollars in sensitive medical inventory, surgical robotics, and pharmaceutical shipments. Consequently, the facility functions under strict security protocols. Access requires biometric scanners, proximity badges, and physical checkpoints managed by trained personnel. I picked up the receiver. The security officer on duty, a retired military police veteran named Marcus, relayed a concise situation report. A male visitor was currently standing in the primary lobby. The individual lacked an appointment, possessed no vendor credentials, and was demanding immediate access to the executive suites. Marcus stated the visitor identified himself as Julian and claimed the matter was a severe personal emergency. Julian had successfully bypassed the digital communication blockade I erected a month prior. He realized text messages and voicemails were bouncing off a firewall. Therefore, he escalated his tactics to a physical intrusion. He assumed my desire to avoid a public workplace disturbance would force me to grant him an audience. I did not panic. I did not experience a spike in my resting heart rate. I instructed Marcus to hold the visitor at the main checkpoint and deny any access to the elevators. I locked my computer terminal, smoothed the lapels of my blazer, and walked out of my office. The elevator descended smoothly to the ground level. The steel doors parted. I stepped out into the expansive, brightly lit reception area. The hospital lobby is a sterile environment, characterized by polished white tile, rigid geometric architecture, and harsh fluorescent overhead lighting. It is a space designed for clinical efficiency, offering zero shadows or soft corners to hide imperfections. I spotted Julian immediately. He was pacing near a row of modular seating units. The visual contrast between the man who sneered at my family in a boutique hotel and the individual currently standing in my lobby was profound. Throughout his adult existence, Julian utilized his parents as an impenetrable shield against accountability. Whenever he overdrafted a checking account during his university years, Richard wired the necessary funds within hours. When he totaled a sports car at age 22, Brenda financed the replacement vehicle before the insurance claim even processed. He operated under the deeply ingrained assumption that a safety net would eternally materialize to catch his failures. He lacked the internal psychological programming required to survive a crisis independently. That safety net was now seized by federal banking authorities and local foreclosure courts. The reality of his unprotected status manifested in his physical appearance. He wore a gray suit I recognized from our previous life together. However, the fabric was deeply wrinkled, suggesting it had been pulled from a duffel bag rather than a closet hanger. His dress shirt lacked a tie, and the collar sat unevenly against his neck. His shoes, previously polished to a high gloss, were scuffed along the toes. He looked exhausted, frantic, and stripped of the synthetic arrogance that once defined his posture. He saw me approach. He stopped pacing and took a rapid step forward. Marcus, the security officer, instantly shifted his weight. Marcus rested a hand near his utility belt and moved half a pace closer to Julian, establishing a clear, visible, defensive perimeter. I offered Marcus a brief nod, indicating I retained control of the interaction, but requested his continued proximity. "Isabella," Julian said. His voice was hoarse, lacking its usual smooth, practiced cadence. "Thank you for coming down. I know I should not have shown up at your job, but I had no other options. Every number I try to dial rings to a disconnected tone." I stopped walking. I maintained a physical distance of approximately 6 feet. I did not cross my arms or display defensive body language. I stood with my hands resting loosely at my sides. I looked at him with the detached, observational curiosity of a clinician reviewing a resolved case study. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited for him to present his objective. He deployed the final tactical maneuver of a cornered parasite. He abandoned intimidation and pivoted directly to pity. "My life is gone, Isabella," Julian stated, his words tumbling out in a rapid, disjointed rush. The bank executed the final eviction order on the Miami house yesterday morning. The local sheriff arrived and changed the exterior locks. My parents are currently staying in a cheap roadside motel near the interstate. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. My personal accounts are still frozen by the fraud division. I possess zero liquidity. It was my father, Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. Richard ruined everything. He manipulated me for years. He forced me to project that wealthy image to protect his own ego. I lost my savings, I lost my reputation, and I lost you because I was trying to seek his approval. I am a victim of his financial incompetence. Please, Isabella, you are the only stable thing I have left in this world. I made a terrible mistake, but I can fix it. Just let me come home with you tonight. We can sort this out. I evaluated his statement. I parsed the syntax of his apology. He did not express remorse for committing identity theft. He did not apologize for forging my signature on a venue contract. He apologized because his actions resulted in his own homelessness. He sought a new host because his previous host was officially bankrupt. He wanted my secure townhouse, my steady salary, and my index funds to subsidize his recovery. He viewed my residence not as a shared partnership, but as a vacant emergency shelter. He attempted to leverage our shared history, hoping the memory of our prior engagement would override my logical assessment of his current risk level. He assumed the societal conditioning that urges women to nurture and repair broken men would compel me to unlock my front door. He miscalculated my specific psychological architecture. I do not repair defective vendors. I replace them. You do not possess a home with me, Julian, I stated. My voice remained steady, echoing slightly off the polished tile walls. My tone carried no malice, no residual anger, and zero sorrow. It was merely the vocalization of a closed ledger. He flinched. The desperation in his eyes hardened into a brief, panicked realization that the pity tactic was failing to penetrate the firewall. Isabella, you cannot just abandon me in a lobby, he whispered, glancing nervously at the security officer nearby. We were going to be married. You loved me. I did not dispute the past. I simply clarified the present. You agreed when your father said my family was poor and low class, Julian, I said, delivering the final, definitive metric of our interaction. You sat at a table, drank champagne, and laughed while you actively planned to steal my credit score to fund your caviar. I held his gaze, ensuring he absorbed the specific weight of the subsequent sentence. You should have checked the balance sheet before you insulted the bank. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but his vocal cords failed to produce a sound. The sheer, indisputable logic of the statement paralyzed his defense mechanisms. He realized he possessed no counter-argument. He had insulted the sole institution capable of funding his survival, and that institution was now permanently closed for business. I did not wait for a rebuttal. I executed a precise, crisp turn. I walked back toward the secure administrative boundary. I retrieved my identification badge from my blazer pocket. I swiped the magnetic strip against the proximity reader mounted on the wall. A sharp electronic click signaled the disengagement of the heavy magnetic locks. The thick glass doors slid open. I stepped through the threshold. I did not look over my shoulder. I allowed the automated panels to slide shut and lock securely behind me. I left Julian standing alone on the sterile tile, bathed in the harsh, unflattering glow of the fluorescent fixtures. The physical barrier finalized the separation. The relationship was officially classified as a terminated liability. The threat he posed to my personal infrastructure was neutralized. However, while I successfully secured my localized environment, my father was simultaneously finalizing a maneuver that would permanently alter the broader economic landscape in Miami. The vacuum created by the collapse of Richard's fake empire was vast, and the natural laws of commerce dictate that empty territory is quickly claimed by a more efficient competitor. 6 months elapsed since the security doors locked in the hospital lobby. The absence of a chaotic element serves as an excellent catalyst for high-level productivity. When you no longer expend daily cognitive bandwidth attempting to decipher the lies of a financial parasite, you generate a massive surplus of energy. I redirected that newly available focus entirely into my professional portfolio. At the Regional Hospital Network, I initiated a comprehensive, systemic audit of our secondary medical suppliers. I identified overlapping logistics, renegotiated hostile freight terms, and eliminated redundant distribution routes that were draining the quarterly budget. I presented my findings to the executive board. By the end of the third fiscal quarter, my department had successfully reduced annual procurement expenditures by $1.2 million. The hospital administration recognized the empirical data. They summoned me to the executive boardroom on a Tuesday morning. They did not offer vague promises of future equity or attempt to manipulate my expectations. They presented a revised employment contract. I received a formal promotion to Senior Director of Supply Chain Operations. The new title was accompanied by a 22% salary increase and a robust tier of corporate stock options. I utilized the initial influx of that new compensation to finalize my own baseline security. I contacted the mortgage lender for my townhouse. I requested the precise payoff amount for the remaining principal balance. I liquidated a small fraction of my high-yield mutual funds, combined it with my recent performance bonus, and initiated a direct wire transfer. 3 weeks later, a thick manila envelope arrived in my secure mailbox. It contained the official property deed. The legal document listed my name as the sole proprietor. I owned the physical structure, the land beneath it, and the roof above it, free and clear of any institutional leverage. I possessed zero debt. I held the heavy paper in my hands and registered the profound, quiet stability of authentic ownership. While I optimized my localized logistics in Tampa, my father executed a massive territorial expansion strategy. The commercial heating and cooling market in Orlando was highly saturated with Tom's existing service contracts. His crews already managed the HVAC infrastructure for the majority of the corporate office parks in the Central District. To sustain his targeted growth rate and utilize his surplus capital, he needed to establish a foothold in a new, high-demand sector. He selected the Miami metropolitan area. Southern Florida presents a relentless, humid climate that requires constant, heavy-duty commercial refrigeration and air conditioning maintenance. It is an incredibly lucrative environment for a tradesman equipped with the heavy infrastructure required to support large-scale corporate clients. To facilitate this expansion, Tom required a regional headquarters. He needed a physical staging ground for his fleet of service vans, a secure warehouse for bulky inventory, and administrative offices for the dispatch team. Commercial real estate in Miami commands a premium valuation. Purchasing a newly constructed facility would require an unnecessary and inefficient capital output. Tom operates his business on the strict principle of maximum efficiency. He monitors bank auctions and distressed commercial property listings, waiting patiently for over-leveraged investors to default on their obligations. In late November, a regional commercial lender listed a Class B office building for public auction at the county courthouse. The property was located in a prominent business district, featuring an attached warehouse space and a secure parking perimeter. The previous ownership group failed to secure long-term tenants, defaulted on their commercial mortgage, and surrendered the asset back to the bank. Tom drove south to attend the courthouse auction in person. He did not rely on high-interest bridge loans or seek outside corporate financing. He arrived with a certified cashier's check drawn directly from his company's operational surplus. He stood in the lobby and placed his bid. Because the financial institution preferred immediate liquidity over holding a non-performing asset on their balance sheet, they accepted the offer without hesitation. Tom acquired the commercial property for a fraction of its projected market value. The following week, my father traveled back to the site with a team of his own contractors to assess the necessary renovations. They walked through the vacant corridors, inspecting the outdated electrical panels and the neglected ventilation systems. The building required significant mechanical upgrades, a task my father's company was uniquely qualified to execute at wholesale cost. During this initial walkthrough, Tom walked out to the main entrance, facing the busy street. The exterior facade featured a large brick wall designed to display the signage of the primary anchor tenant. The metal letters had been physically removed years ago by a salvage crew, but the outline of the previous company remained highly visible. The intense Florida sun and frequent rain had bleached the surrounding brick, leaving a distinct, shadowed imprint of the defunct business name permanently etched into the masonry. Tom stood on the sidewalk and read the faded silhouette. It spelled out the exact name of Richard's former boutique consulting firm. This was the identical office building where Julian's father once pretended to command a vast corporate empire. It was the physical location where Richard operated his vague advisory business before failing to meet his margins and filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation. The universe occasionally delivers a poetic symmetry that defies statistical probability. My father did not call Richard to gloat. He did not draft a triumphant message on social media to humiliate the man who once called him low class at an engagement party. Tom treats business as a ledger of facts, not a theater for personal vendettas. He simply pulled out his cellular phone, dialed a local commercial sign fabricator, and placed an expedited work order. On a Thursday afternoon, my cell phone chimed with an incoming multimedia message from Tom. I opened the text. The screen displayed a high-resolution photograph of the newly acquired Miami headquarters. A heavy industrial crane lifted a massive brushed steel sign into position against the exterior brick wall. The heavy metal letters spelled out the name of my father's commercial HVAC company. The mechanics of the installation were clearly visible in the image. The steel bolts pierced the masonry, driving deep into the structure to secure the new corporate logo. The heavy industrial lettering perfectly covered the faded, ghosted outline of Richard's failed consulting firm. The shadow of the fake aristocrat was permanently obscured by the physical weight of a blue-collar tradesman's success. Tom included a brief, single-line caption beneath the photograph. Regional headquarters secured. Operations commence Monday. I stared at the image on my screen for a long time. The satisfying nature of the conclusion resided in its pure, unemotional logic. My family did not seek revenge against Julian or his parents. We did not attempt to destroy their lives or actively orchestrate their downfall. We simply stepped out of the blast radius, withdrew our financial subsidies, and allowed their own unsustainable leverage to crush them under its own weight. Richard projected an illusion of immense superiority. He sneered at men who worked with their hands. He believed wearing a designer suit and sipping expensive scotch elevated his inherent value above the people who maintained the infrastructure of the actual world. Yet, the final ledger proved his philosophy critically flawed. The man who possessed calluses on his palms purchased the ashes of the fake millionaire's empire using cash. He acquired the very building where Richard's legacy died, repurposed it into a staging ground for practical, essential labor, and bolted his own name directly over the wreckage. It was not a petty retaliation. It was just a highly intelligent real estate acquisition. The fact that it served as the ultimate punctuation mark on our conflict was merely a convenient byproduct of authentic, disciplined labor. I saved the photograph to my digital archives. The visual proof of my father's expansion served as a concrete reminder of the power inherent in quiet competence. The contrasting fates of our two families were officially sealed in public records and property deeds. The only remaining task was to synthesize the entire ordeal into a functional protocol for the future, ensuring the boundaries I established would never be breached again by anyone attempting to mask their deficits with unearned arrogance. I often review the events of that Friday evening at the boutique hotel in Tampa through the objective lens of a completed supply chain audit. When a crisis initially unfolds, the human brain attempts to process the trauma through an emotional filter. We are socially conditioned to seek resolution, to find the misunderstanding, and to smooth over the rough edges of an interpersonal conflict. If I had succumbed to that standard social conditioning, my current reality would be unrecognizable. If I had convinced my father to return to the dining room, if I had accepted Julian's gaslighting on the outdoor patio, and if I had paid for the upgraded floral arrangements to keep the peace, I would have successfully cemented my own financial ruin. I occasionally calculate the projected losses of that alternate timeline. Had the wedding proceeded, I would have legally bound my pristine credit history to a man willing to commit felony identity theft to purchase imported caviar. Within the first year of our marriage, the inevitable collapse of Richard and Brenda's leveraged lifestyle would have crashed directly into my personal accounts. Julian would have utilized the legal bonds of our union to mandate my financial intervention. My high-yield mutual funds would have been liquidated to satisfy his parents' delinquent mortgage. My index funds would have been drained to cure their vehicular repossessions. I would have spent the next decade working 60-hour weeks at the hospital simply to subsidize the fake aristocratic illusion of a family that fundamentally despised my origins. Viewed through that specific analytical framework, the missing chairs were not an insult. They were the greatest diagnostic tool I ever received. Brenda spent exactly $50 to bribe a hotel maitre d' to remove the seating from my private dining room. She intended the transaction to humiliate my parents and establish her own unquestionable dominance. Instead, her $50 expenditure inadvertently triggered the forensic investigation that saved my net worth. It was the most favorable return on investment I have ever experienced. The missing chairs forced me to stop ignoring the uncomfortable math of my own life. They forced me to recognize that arrogance is rarely a byproduct of actual superiority. Arrogance is almost exclusively a camouflage mechanism deployed by individuals who lack authentic capital. There is a popular psychological adage that suggests when people show you who they are, you should believe them the first time. The statement is accurate, but it is incomplete for the purposes of survival. I propose a necessary operational amendment to that philosophy. When people show you who they are, believe them. But when people tell you who you are, you must immediately audit them. Richard looked at my father, a man who built a 7-figure commercial logistics company from a single used van, and called him poor and low class. Richard attempted to define my family's value based on his own internal deficits. He projected his own staggering insolvency onto the most secure individual in the room. Toxic individuals will always accuse you of possessing the exact flaws they are desperately trying to conceal. If a partner calls you overly sensitive, you are likely identifying their manipulation. If an in-law calls you materialistic, they are likely plotting to spend your money. When someone assigns you a negative label, do not internalize the insult. Investigate their balance sheet. You will inevitably find the bankruptcy they are projecting onto you. If you are listening to this narrative right now, perhaps sitting in your car in a corporate parking lot or looking at the glowing screen of your phone in a dark living room, I need you to evaluate your current logistical partnerships. I know the precise mechanics of the trap you might be navigating. Perhaps you are currently funding the lifestyle of a partner who perpetually promises that his big promotion is just around the corner. Perhaps you are paying the rent, covering the utility bills, and managing the household infrastructure, while he repeatedly forgets his wallet at dinner. Perhaps you are dealing with future in-laws who critique your career, insult your origins, and demand your compliance, while contributing absolutely nothing to your shared future. You might be absorbing their passive-aggressive comments, swallowing your own dignity, and remaining quiet simply to avoid being labeled as the difficult woman who ruins the family dynamic. You justify the endurance. You tell yourself that relationships require compromise. You convince yourself that maintaining a calm environment is worth the occasional disrespect. I need you to hear this specific directive and apply it to your own ledger. Your silence is not peace. It is a subsidy. Every time you accept a subtle insult without a response, you are funding their delusion. Every time you pay a bill they promise to cover, you are underwriting their incompetence. You are acting as the unpaid venture capitalist for a failing enterprise. You are providing the necessary emotional and financial oxygen that allows their toxicity to thrive. Your quiet endurance does not make you a loyal partner. It makes you a viable host for a parasite. You possess the authority to close the account. You hold the power to stop financing the people who treat your effort like an endless, invisible resource. Walking away from a bad investment does not make you a failure. It makes you a highly competent manager of your own life. The moment you revoke their access to your resources, you will discover that the devastating heartbreak you feared is actually just the sudden, beautiful sensation of weightlessness. I am currently sitting on the private patio of my townhouse in Tampa. The evening air is warm, carrying the distinct scent of the nearby ocean and the damp earth from a recent rain shower. The environment is remarkably quiet. I do not have to check my credit report for unauthorized inquiries. I do not have to decipher the manipulative text messages of a frantic, bankrupt family. I own the brick pavers beneath my feet. I possess the official deed to the structure behind me. I earned the promotion that secures my future. I achieved this stability not by compromising my boundaries, but by enforcing them with lethal precision. I am holding a glass of wine I purchased from a local market. The bottle cost exactly $15. I poured it myself. I can state with absolute empirical certainty that it tastes vastly superior to the $140 reserve champagne Richard swirled in his crystal flute. It tastes better because I bought it with authentic capital, and I am drinking it on territory I defended and secured. I am not sitting alone because I was abandoned. I am sitting alone because I successfully curated my perimeter. Tomorrow evening, Tom, Sarah, and Lucas are driving down from Orlando to celebrate my recent corporate promotion. I prepared the patio for their arrival. The wooden outdoor dining table is clean, polished, and securely positioned. I walked out here earlier this afternoon and counted the seating arrangements. There are 4 chairs placed around the table. They are sturdy, comfortable, and guaranteed to remain exactly where they belong. There is no requirement to bribe a waiter to secure a place at this table. There is no admission fee, no dress code, and no performance required to earn the right to sit down. I possess exactly enough chairs for everyone I actually love, and I will never again allow anyone to stand in the shadows of my own life. Looking back at the trajectory of the past year, I view the canceled wedding not as a failed relationship, but as a highly successful risk management operation. Surviving a financial and psychological extraction leaves you with more than just a clean credit report. It leaves you with a permanent operational blueprint for navigating human behavior. I synthesized the data from my experience with Julian and his parents into 5 core directives. Lesson 1. True wealth does not require an audience. Individuals who possess authentic capital do not need to humiliate service workers or insult tradesmen to validate their societal position. If someone is loudly performing their high-class status, they are actively masking a massive deficit. Lesson 2. Never internalize an insult from a parasite. When toxic people assign you a negative label, they are projecting their own structural failures onto you. When they tell you who you are, do not argue. Audit them. Their accusations are always confessions of their own hidden bankruptcy. Lesson 3. Silence in the face of disrespect is not keeping the peace. It is an active subsidy. When you swallow your dignity to avoid a conflict, you are underwriting their behavior. You are funding the exact mechanism that is destroying your own infrastructure. Lesson 4. You never need to outshout a manipulator. Manipulators thrive in environments fueled by high emotion and chaotic arguments. Data is their greatest vulnerability. You do not need to cry, and you do not need to scream. Simply compile the receipts, present the math, and let the undeniable facts execute the termination. Lesson 5. A severed relationship is not a personal failure. Society conditions us to view a broken engagement as a tragedy. In reality, walking away from a bad investment is the highest form of self-preservation. Enforcing your boundaries is the most valuable asset class you can ever acquire. I am no longer the woman standing near a hotel kitchen door watching her parents be treated like hired help. I am a senior director managing a multi-million-dollar supply chain. My father is operating a highly profitable regional headquarters out of the exact building where my former prospective father-in-law filed for liquidation. The ledger is perfectly balanced, and my perimeter is secure. Thank you for listening to my final analysis. If this operational breakdown resonated with you, or if you are currently running an audit on your own relationships, please subscribe to Maya Tells Stories. Share your own data points in the comments below. Have you ever discovered a hidden deficit behind a partner's arrogant facade, or are you preparing to deliver your own manila envelope? I read every single response. Remember, your peace of mind is your primary capital. Do not let anyone leverage it without your authorized signature. I will see you in the next case file.